At 143 Breyer Road in Brightburn, Kansas, Tori and Kyle Breyer are trying to conceive when a sudden explosion outside shakes their home, prompting them to look out the window and witness a mysterious fire. Time passes through a series of home video clips, showing their adopted son Brandon growing up over the years. 10 years later, Tori is seen searching the house, trying to get Brandon ready for school. Brandon is nowhere to be found, prompting Tori to search the barn, where he suddenly startles her with a jump scare. Kyle soon joins them. Later at school, Brandon is seen doodling strange symbols throughout his notebook. When the teacher asks him a question about bees, he responds with remarkable insight, revealing his intelligence. However, despite his academic aptitude, he struggles socially and becomes a target for bullying by his peers. Brandon's classmate, Caitlin Connor, shows a moment of kindness and empathy toward him. That night, as Brandon sleeps, Tori continues working on her painting. Meanwhile, out in the barn, a mysterious object begins to emit a glowing red light. At that moment, Brandon experiences a violent seizure. He wakes up, his eyes glowing an eerie red, then abruptly opens his window and leaps out. Alarmed by the commotion, Tori steps outside to investigate. Tori begins calling out for Brandon and cautiously enters the barn. Inside, she discovers him attempting to force open the locked basement door. Startled by her presence, Brandon appears confused and disoriented. As if unaware of how he got there, Tori embraces him gently, convinced that he had been sleepwalking. When asked, Brandon claims he heard voices coming from the basement. Reassuring him, Tori takes him back to bed. Unbeknownst to them, the mysterious object in the barn continues to glow ominously red. The next morning, Kyle joins Tori, but she chooses not to mention the incident in the barn, simply stating that Brandon had been sleepwalking. Later, Brandon helps Kyle with some woodwork. Before leaving for the seed store, Kyle asks Brandon to mow the lawn. Brandon struggles to start the mower, and in a moment of frustration, he unknowingly applies immense strength, launching the machine several feet away. Amazed by his own strength, Brandon approaches the displaced lawnmower and curiously places his hand into the spinning blades. The blades shatter upon contact, yet his hand remains completely unharmed. That night, to celebrate his birthday, Brandon accompanies Tori to an arcade. While there, his uncle and aunt present him with a rifle as a gift, but Kyle promptly confiscates it, firmly stating that Brandon is still just a child. Brandon, furious, insists that Kyle give him the rifle back, his anger growing as he demands it. Kyle, however, remains firm, telling him it's time to leave the arcade. Back at home, Kyle confides in Tori, expressing his growing concern about their son. Tori agrees, and they decide that a weekend camping trip might be just what the family needs to reconnect. On the weekend, as the family prepares for the trip, Tori asks Brandon to grab a jacket, but he ignores her request. Kyle notices that Brandon has chewed through his fork, a disturbing sign of his increasing strength. Tori discovers unsettling drawings in Brandon's room, depicting human anatomy alongside images of girls. During the trip, Kyle attempts to have the birds and the bees conversation with Brandon, reassuring him that it's normal to give in to his urges occasionally. Later that night, Tori hears strange noises coming from outside and calls out for Brandon. Elsewhere, Caitlin, Brandon's classmate, wakes up to the sound of music playing loudly. She turns it off, but the music resumes. Turning it off again, she notices someone standing behind the curtain. Frightened, she calls for her mother. When her mother checks, no one is there. Caitlin insists she saw Brandon standing behind the curtain, but her mother dismisses it. At the camp, Tori starts searching for the missing Brandon. He suddenly appears behind her, startling her. The next day at school, Tori picks Brandon up and notices him drawing strange symbols in his notebook. That night, Kyle hears chickens screaming in the barn. He grabs the rifle and heads out to investigate. In the barn, he finds Brandon standing there. Kyle tries to talk to Brandon, but he remains silent, unresponsive. After a moment, Brandon notices his father and quietly walks back inside. That night, Kyle is awakened by the sound of chickens screaming once again. He rushes to the barn and finds all the chickens dead. He shows Tori the scene, and she insists it was likely wolves. However, Kyle remains unconvinced, suspecting that Brandon might be responsible. Tori doesn't believe him and goes back in. At school, during a trust exercise, Brandon falls towards Caitlin. Instead of catching him, she lets him hit the ground. The teacher asks Caitlin to help him up by offering her hand, but she refuses and calls him a pervert. The teacher insists, and when Caitlin finally extends her hand, Brandon grabs it with immense force, crushing her hand painfully. Following Erica's complaint, Brandon is suspended from school. Erica demands that Brandon be jailed, claiming he was in her daughter Caitlin's room the previous night. Back at home that evening, Tori confides in Kyle, revealing that when she initially told him Brandon was sleepwalking, he had actually been in the barn tugging at the trap door. While sleeping, Brandon repeatedly murmurs the word "take." He awakens, walks outside, and approaches the barn. There, he breaks the chain securing the door to the spaceship. Tori, noticing the red light emanating from the barn, runs toward it. As she enters, she sees Brandon levitating above the ship. Just as she reaches out to grab him, he suddenly falls, cutting himself on the ship's sharp surface. Tori catches up to Brandon and, in an emotional moment, explains that despite trying very hard, both she and Kyle couldn't conceive. One day, a baby arrived in the spaceship, and they raised him as their own, calling him Brandon. Feeling betrayed by the revelation, Brandon becomes enraged, throwing objects around in a fit of fury. In a state of heightened emotion, he runs outside, his mind consumed by the voices that continue urging him to take the world. As Brandon's eyes glow bright red, Caitlin's laptop suddenly malfunctions. She looks up and sees Brandon standing in her room, holding flowers for her. He tells her that he is very special and that someday the entire world will know his name. Meanwhile, Caitlin's mother, Erica, is finishing her shift and closing the store she works at, unaware of the unfolding events. As Erica inspects the store, she notices strange symbols all over the windows. Suddenly, the lights begin to flicker, and with a loud burst, the light explodes, causing shards of glass to embed into her eye. Panicked, she sees a shadowy figure standing in front of her. Grabbing a baseball bat in a desperate attempt to defend herself, fear takes over, and she flees, running towards the deep freezer to hide. Brandon uses his laser power to get through the door. She closes her injured eye and sees Brandon wearing a mask. The next morning, Brandon calmly descends the stairs for breakfast. Meanwhile, at the crime scene, police have arrived and are inspecting the freezer door. They can't make sense of the strange circumstances. As they continue their investigation, they notice a peculiar symbol drawn on the window. At school, Brandon is in counseling with her Aunt Marilee, who is the only counselor available. Brandon tells her that he feels good, that he is not from here, that he is something else, something superior. She starts asking him about how he feels about what he did to Caitlin. Brandon gets seemingly agitated at her. At night, Kyle plays billiards with Noah, Marilee's husband. Noah informs them that he needs to leave. At home, Tori calls out for Brandon, but he doesn't respond. Marilee is putting away her clothes when the lights flicker, and Brandon is levitating outside. Her alarm goes off, indicating motion in the backyard. When Marilee looks outside, she sees nothing. Suddenly, there's a knock on the door. She opens it to find Brandon standing there. He tells her that they need to talk, warning her not to discuss their counseling session, as it wouldn't be good for her. Marilee tells him that his appearance is inappropriate and insists he leave. Marilee closes the door, but her motion alarm goes off again. She checks the backyard but finds nothing. She texts Noah, telling him she's going to bed. As she lies down, Brandon appears in her room, wearing a mask and a cape. Meanwhile, Noah arrives home, enters the bathroom, and notices something strange in the background. Noah approaches the figure in the bathroom and removes the mask, revealing it is Brandon. He grabs him, telling him he's taking him home. Brandon begs him not to tell his parents. When Brandon refuses to get into the truck, Noah yells at him, but Brandon throws him aside with ease. Unable to locate Brandon, Noah gets into his truck and begins driving. Brandon smashes the truck's window, and the engine cuts off, leaving the vehicle immobile. Noah attempts to start the truck repeatedly, but it refuses to turn on. Suddenly, Brandon appears in front of him, and Noah, stunned, watches as Brandon levitates into the air, flying. In the blink of an eye, Brandon vanishes. With ease, he lifts the truck and throws it down violently. Brandon then draws his strange symbol on the road. Back home, Tori continues to call Marilee, frantic about Brandon's whereabouts. Brandon returns, holding his shirt in his hands. Tori, relieved yet concerned, asks where he's been, to which Brandon calmly replies that he was playing soccer. His father, Kyle, is in disbelief. Brandon explains that after school some kids invited him to play, but soon they began pushing and tripping him, laughing at his expense. Brandon decided to walk all the way back home, telling his parents that he's tired and going to bed. Tori attempts to take his shirt from him, but he refuses to let go. After he leaves, Tori confides in Kyle, telling him she believes Brandon is lying. She thinks he needs to see a specialist. Later that night, Brandon wakes up to find Tori missing. As he looks around, he notices that the wall in his room has been replaced by a view of the woods. Brandon calls out for Tori and ventures into the woods. He eventually finds her standing near the spaceship, holding Brandon as a baby. As he gazes at the baby, its eyes begin to glow red, causing Kyle to suddenly wake up. Soon after, they receive a call from Marilee informing them of Noah's accident. The police believe Noah swerved to avoid hitting a deer. Marilee calls Tori and Kyle, asking about Brandon and telling them how he came to visit her the previous night. At home, Tori and Kyle inform Brandon about Noah's accident, but he remains emotionless. Kyle then confronts Brandon, telling him they know he visited Marilee. Tori asks if he knows anything about what happened to Noah, but Brandon denies any involvement, insisting he would never hurt his uncle. Kyle grows increasingly angry and demands that Brandon tell them the truth. Brandon attempts to go upstairs, but Kyle stops him. In response, Brandon pushes Kyle into the wall. Later, while Brandon is in the shower, Kyle enters his room and begins searching for Brandon's shirt. He finds it hidden behind the drawers, covered in blood. Brandon enters his room, and Kyle tells him that he wants to apologize. Later, Kyle shows the shirt to Tori, convinced that it contains Noah's blood. However, Tori doesn't believe him. She argues that Noah was likely drunk and that Kyle had let him drive. Tori believes Kyle is now trying to place the blame on Brandon out of guilt. Kyle tells Tori that they need to take action or more people will get hurt. Tori, frustrated, storms out. Meanwhile, at the police station, the officers notice the same symbol found at the accident site, which matches the one on the window at the diner. Later that night, Kyle tells Tori that he plans to take Brandon on a hunting trip, hoping to bond with him as his father. As Kyle and Brandon head into the woods, Sheriff arrives at Tori and Kyle's house. He shows Tori the symbol he discovered, pointing out that it resembles BB, potentially standing for Brandon Breyer. The sheriff expresses his desire to search the house, but Tori insists that he leave. Before he goes, the sheriff warns her that he will be back. Tori rushes upstairs and finds Brandon's notebook, filled with symbols and drawings of all the things he's done. One page is covered with the words, "Take the world," and another depicts Brandon destroying the world. Meanwhile, during the camping trip, Kyle attempts to shoot Brandon in the head, but the bullet bounces off his skull, revealing just how much Brandon has changed. Kyle attempts to shoot again, but Brandon disappears. Kyle starts running, only to have Brandon appear in front of him and use his laser vision to burn his face. Back home, Tori tries to call Kyle, but when someone answers, she tells him he was right. It was Brandon. However, instead of Kyle, it's Brandon on the other end of the line. Brandon starts destroying the house, and in desperation, Tori calls 911 for help. The sheriff, hearing the dispatch, tells them he is on his way. Upon arriving, he sees the house in ruins. Tori attempts to run toward the sheriff for safety, but Brandon blocks her path. She tries again, but Brandon reaches the sheriff before she can get to him. Tori's partner urges her to take cover as Brandon closes in. She attempts to call for backup, but her radio is malfunctioning. Brandon appears before her, cutting off her call once again. Desperate, Tori climbs out of the window and, remembering that the ship was able to harm Brandon, she rushes towards the barn, hoping it holds the key to stopping him. Tori reaches the ship and is horrified to find Erica's lifeless body. Overcome with urgency, she grabs a piece of the ship and climbs out, calling out for Brandon. He appears before her, and in a desperate attempt to reach him, she tells him that she still loves him, removing his mask. She believes there is good inside him, urging him to listen. Brandon, conflicted, confesses that he wants to do good. Tori hugs Brandon tightly before attempting to stab him with the metal piece she took from the ship. However, Brandon stops her, gripping her tightly before lifting her high into the sky. He releases her, dropping her from an unimaginable height. As she plummets, Brandon notices an incoming airplane. Next morning, it is revealed that the plane has collided with the Breyer's house. The crash obliterates all evidence, leaving nothing behind that could prove Brandon's involvement or the truth of his actions. As rescue workers attend to Brandon, a piece of the plane wreckage reveals his symbol painted on it. News reports about various locations across the world where Brandon is spotted as a mysterious figure at the site of multiple disasters. His symbol continues to appear, marking his presence in each tragedy. The movie ends with a conspiracy theorist on a news broadcast, urgently warning the public about the existence of superpowered beings, suggesting that humanity must act before it's too late. Please like and subscribe the channel for more videos like these.